Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Views of an Outsider, the Outsider's View from July 19th. If you want to keep up with everything that's going on in the world, but you don't want to drag down your entire life by listening to the news every day, then get the main stories right here, once a week, and spend the rest of your time actually living your best life. Let's get right into it. Last Sunday, Lindsey Graham, the well-known senator from South Carolina, suddenly passed away after having a massive aortic dissection due to heart disease, prompting tributes to start pouring in from friends and colleagues on both sides of the aisle, which was appropriate because Senator Graham had a reputation for working across the aisle whenever possible, and he did count many of his Democrat colleagues as friends, and they did the same. Sean Hannity of Fox News posted a tribute about Senator Graham's early days, talking about how he had raised his teenage sister after losing both of his parents when he was just 21 years old. Appropriately, that same sister will now be stepping up to fill her brother's seat in the Senate until a permanent replacement is elected, and she is also apparently going to run for that seat. Mr. Hannity went on to add, contrary to a public narrative that he was a war hawk, it was the opposite that is true. He wanted an end to the war with Russia and Ukraine, an end to all conflicts in the Middle East. There is no elected official that traveled to these regions more than Senator Graham. His dream for the Middle East was that of a lasting peace in the region between every nation, and his hope was this could all be accomplished by the early fall. And we pray that our God has welcomed him into his loving embrace in the paradise he has promised his believers. Godspeed, Senator Graham, as you return to the home of our Creator and Savior. Senator Graham's fellow Republican senator, Josh Hawley of Missouri, had this to say, I'm shocked to hear of the loss of my colleague and friend, Lindsey Graham. Lindsey loved this country, loved South Carolina, and loved a good fight. He was a champion for free speech against the giant tech companies and a great advocate for constitutionalist judges. Aaron and I remember his family in prayer. The Vice President J.D. Vance recalled, early in my Senate tenure, I remember getting into a shouting match with Lindsey about a Ukraine funding bill at lunch, and then learning the very next day that he was pushing rail legislation I really cared about behind the scenes. That was Lindsey Graham. He fought like hell for the things he believed in, and he was just as willing to go to bat for you when it counted. Lindsey had the best sense of humor in the Senate. We certainly had our disagreements, but I couldn't help but like him. A one-of-a-kind figure in our politics. I'll be praying for him and his family. Meanwhile, on the left, the Democrat Senator Amy Klobuchar also paid tribute to her friend and colleague, saying, mostly, my fond memories of speaking time with Lindsey, and we traveled the world with John McCain, was not about the ups and downs of his policy positions. It was about his love for the world, his loyalty to hard causes and his friends, and the pure joy he brought to life. I will miss him. The Democrat Senator John Fetterman did the same, adding, sudden and awful news about Senator Lindsey Graham. The United States lost a foreign policy giant. On a personal level, he had always been kind, gracious, and thoughtful. Giselle and I extend our deepest condolences to his family, friends, and staff. The United States Ambassador to the UN, Mike Waltz, remembered Senator Graham in a different way than the rest, posting, I first met Lindsey not as Senator, but as Colonel Graham in the Air National Guard. He insisted on spending his 3 weeks annual training in Afghanistan, training Afghan Army JAG officers. From Libya to Lebanon, no member of Congress traveled more to appreciate both the troops and bring ground truth back to legislating. Meghan McCain also posted her thoughts, which were, the first time I met Lindsey Graham, I was 11 years old in a hotel lobby, and he had just attended a political event with my dad. He sat down next to me and told me that he loved my dad. I remember liking his deep Southern accent and smile, and immediately felt comfortable around him. He somehow seemed younger, hipper, and more interesting than most of the political figures that rotated around my dad's orbit. Like many relationships in life, mine with Lindsey was complex in later years. I choose to remember the endless laughter and joy he brought to my family so many times, in so many ways. These memories are some of the most precious of my life. I hope that he is at peace, and I hope he is in heaven drinking a White Russian and fishing with my dad and Joe. In the media, Ben Dominic at the Daily Wire recalled, I called Lindsey Graham a dangerously insane neocon. And the next time we saw each other, he hugged me and said, everyone's got an opinion. On the left side of the media, Kristen Welker of NBC's Meet the Press revealed that Senator Graham was scheduled as a guest on Sunday morning's episode, noting that it would have been his 64th time to come on her program. President Trump took the senator's place on Sunday morning, and when Ms. Walker asked him a question about Iran, the president made it clear that Senator Lindsey Graham was the only topic that he was interested in discussing that day, saying, I want to honor the life of Lindsey Graham, so I don't want to talk about it. I told you that before the call. I want to talk about one person today, Lindsey Graham. As colleagues left white roses in a vase on his Senate desk and pinned personal notes to his office door in memorial, the list of tributes was truly endless, including the Democrat Senator Mark Warner, the director of the FBI, Kash Patel, and the governor of South Carolina, Henry McMaster, as well as the Senate Majority Leader, John Thune, and the former Vice President, Mike Pence. In fact, there were really just two small camps of people who went the other way. There were some pathetic internet ghouls who were openly celebrating, as you would expect, from those who have carved up their own souls piece by piece until they died long ago, including some so-called celebrities that you've never heard of. And then there were certain members of the Iranian regime. Often there was overlap between these two groups, ironically enough. But people in both camps were publicly mocking the senator's death with gleeful claims that he was burning in hell right now, and doing so for no better reason than they disagreed with his politics, which says far more about them than it does about him, a fact which they seem to miss every time. But you really can't feel anything except mild pity, along with a slight pull to roll your eyes at people that are this mentally ill and sad, like the Iranian television presenter who smiled as he said, quote, I congratulate the great nation of Iran on the fact that Lindsey Graham, the warmonger, anti-Iran U.S. senator, has gone straight to hell. Now, the irony is that the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps had posted a series of photos of people that their death cult regime is targeting for assassination, chief among them being President Trump, but there was a red X drawn through Senator Graham's face as well. In fact, the senator had reacted to these very threats on his life by the despotic regime of Iran just days earlier when he quipped, "At least they used a good photo of me. Judge me by my enemies." So let's do that. He wanted to be remembered as the type of person that the low-quality people making these remarks would hate. Like the Lincoln Project's co-founder, Steve Schmidt, who ranted online, Lindsey Graham was a malignant clown, a venomous jester by choice. Lindsey Graham was a simple, tragic man. He lacked a moral core. The great empty spaces of his life were filled with an insatiable need for relevance. He found it as a cast member in the most malignant reality show ever made. End quote. One word, dude. Projection. I'll gladly buy you a mirror if you lack one. Jackson Hinkle, whoever that is, called Senator Graham a war criminal, a word which the rest of us know has an actual definition, and that definition does not include, "I disagree with him on politics," before adding in a separate post, 43 million people attended the funeral of Saeed Ali Khamenei. How many people will attend Lindsey Graham's funeral? Well, dude, it is probably true that a lot less people come when you aren't threatening to flog or hang the people who don't participate. But still, numbers are not everything, because every single person that voluntarily comes to Senator Graham's funeral actually wants to be there and actually respected him. And the same cannot even begin to be said for your dead butcher of his own people. I hope that clears up where the value actually lies in life for you. Even Anna Kasparian of the Young Turks could find nothing but her own ugliness to express, saying simply, "Good riddance." And when she was rightly called out for her own bad behavior and the way that it reflected on her, as opposed to the dead man that she was attacking, Anna did not have the integrity to step up like an adult. Instead, she started trying to defend her own bad behavior by deflecting with an entirely theoretical, 100% non-existent scenario in which she claimed, with no evidence at all to back it up, that the people who criticized her would celebrate the death of a Palestinian toddler, which, of course, they would not. Her exact words were, "I love how people who've normalized celebrations of death are clutching their pearls today. Just pretend I'm talking about a Palestinian toddler. Maybe then you can relate to my post." Honey, I'm going to speak slowly, so try to follow me, Anna. Just because we don't agree with your political position on Gaza, that does not mean that we celebrate the death of a Palestinian toddler. Now, I can understand why you would not be able to make that distinction, because you yourself can no longer distinguish between the two in your own moral stands, where your politics always wins out these days, which is why you don't seem to care anywhere near as much about, say, the dead Bebas babies who were beaten to death with the fists of Hamas butchers. But then again, they are Jews. You're going to have to do better than that, Anna. You are in the wrong. Projection doesn't change that. Grow some integrity if you want respect. If you don't, you will disappear into the irrelevant sewage of internet outrage and become indistinguishable from the rest. Have a nice day. Meanwhile, someone called Wajahat Ali said that Lindsey Graham was a terrible man who betrayed whatever values he had to kiss up to Trump just to stay, in his words, relevant. He is now dead. So if you're keeping score, the people who behave this way are either internet trolls living in sad basements because no one can stand to be around them, including themselves, unhinged influencers online, most of which you have never heard of, who have only their poisonous vitriol to keep them warm at night, and Iranian butchers who kill and rape in the name of their religion. This is the quality of people who make up the enemies of Lindsey Graham. So I really don't think that it's the senator who ultimately comes out looking like the bad guy when you run down through the list of the very low-quality people who hated him. That is a list of enemies to be profoundly proud of. But as I said, most elected Democrats took a very different tone, and I want to be clear about that. Many of them were quick to note that they disagreed with Senator Graham on politics on a regular basis, obviously, while also saying that despite this, they valued him as not only a colleague, but also as a friend. But the senator's sudden death was not the only one that took place this week. The actor, Sam Neill, who was best known for playing Alan in Steven Spielberg's classic Jurassic Park, died unexpectedly on Monday at the age of 78. Mr. Neill had announced in 2023 that he had been diagnosed with a rare form of blood cancer, but in April of this year, he was declared to be cancer-free, so his family shared this statement. It is with immense sadness that the Wayanu, I don't know if I'm mispronouncing that, but it means extended family, of Sam Neill, share the news of his passing on Monday, 13th July, in Sydney, Australia. Sam was surrounded by family and passed with a dignity that has characterized his whole life. The loss was sudden and unexpected, but blessed by the fact that Sam remained cancer-free. They would like to express their deepest gratitude to the staff at St. Vincent's Private Hospital for their incredible care. More details will be shared later, but for now, on behalf of the family, we ask that you respect their privacy as they navigate this immeasurable loss. To those of us who were obviously not family and friends, this man was an iconic actor who came from Northern Ireland. And just as a fun fact, he almost didn't get his biggest role, starring in Jurassic Park. He was only picked after Harrison Ford turned it down. When the film debuted in 1993, Mr. Neill told the Los Angeles Times, "I like playing villains and bad guys, characters with moral ambiguity, because in a way, they are easier to play." But during an interview in 2016, he also told Esquire UK, "It doesn't matter how popular an actor you are. Nobody will remember you forever. Acting is ephemeral. So it's nice if you can leave something behind, like a great wine or a beautiful house that has a legacy." In addition to his vineyard, Mr. Neill also leaves behind 4 children and 8 grandchildren, his true legacy on this earth. In 2023, Mr. Neill told the Sydney Morning Herald, "I do hope I'm not a celebrity because I think it's 2 different jobs. You can be an actor, hopefully a very good actor, But it's another job to be a celebrity, and that's one you can sign up for or not. And I never signed up for that. I've avoided that like the plague. The winemaking thing is absolutely half my life and has been immensely rewarding, and it's very different from everything else that I do. I'm sort of half farmer, half thespian, if you like, which seems to be the way that he would hope to be remembered. Elsewhere, other serious losses were thankfully prevented. An entirely naked man was arrested last weekend after trying to kidnap a 7-year-old girl who was on vacation with her family in Portland, Oregon. That family was visiting the Tom McCall Waterfront Park last Saturday evening when a man who had been running around the park completely naked for 10 minutes suddenly grabbed the little girl by the arm and fought hard to snatch her away from her mother, who was holding on to the little girl's other arm. The struggle became so intense that the little girl was actually lifted completely off the ground as the two adults fought for her. In her mother's case, desperately trying to save her child from a clearly dangerous degenerate. And in the naked man's case, well, I think we all know what he had in mind. The little girl's father and another bystander leapt into action, hitting the naked pervert to get him off of this child that he was attempting to kidnap. A second bystander sprayed him with pepper spray, at which point the attacker jumped into the Willamette River, where he unfortunately did not drown. Officers with the Portland Police Bureau were sent in from the North Precinct. They found the naked man, 31-year-old Daniel Vassie, still swimming around in the river. The officers pulled him out and arrested him on several different criminal charges, including both first and second degree attempted kidnapping, plus third-degree assault. The nude perv was booked into the Multnomah County Detention Center. Meanwhile, the little girl that he attacked sustained minor injuries, which were treated by paramedics. They were not serious enough for her to need to go to the hospital, thankfully. This attempted kidnapping was not, unsurprisingly, the first problem with this man, which you no doubt already knew because you have a functioning brain, as these sorts of things are rarely the first crime that someone attempts. He was a menace to society that was being allowed to be a menace to society for no good reason, to the detriment of others and to the detriment of himself. Only 12 minutes before Vassie tried to snatch this little girl, police officers had received calls about a naked man running around through the park, and one of those callers said that the naked man had tried to punch him in the head. Thanks to Oregon's celebrated craziness and the terrible way that they treat their police officers who protect them, which frequently leads to severe understaffing in their major cities, police officers were too busy responding to other calls to be able to respond to this one immediately, according to the New York Post. And that situation almost cost a young girl a truly horrific nightmare on what was supposed to be a fun family vacation for a child from Michigan. It is time to stop letting everyone be held hostage by this. And while we're on the subject of the completely unjustifiable antics of the extreme left, Congressman Khanna, the California Democrat who is clearly making a bid to be the party's next presidential candidate in 2028, got caught lying through his teeth thanks to video footage, which some people just can't seem to realize is always going to emerge in the modern world that we live in now. Here's what happened. Khanna spent all of last week accusing both the Israeli people and Israeli soldiers of unlawfully detaining him and endangering his life during an overseas trip in the company of a far-left activist group called Breaking the Silence. That group attempted to visit a disputed site in the southern Hebron Hills, where there is some unauthorized Arab construction going on, which has turned that location into a battle site, which, in order to limit clashes, has caused Israeli authorities to designate that area as a closed military zone, which means that it requires advanced authorization to enter it. This spot is also an archaeological site that was designated for preservation going all the way back to when Great Britain controlled the area 100 years ago in the mid-20th century. So any unauthorized construction could damage the archaeological remains, which is another reason to protect the area from becoming a tug-of-war between disputing factions of people. Nevertheless, all that anyone has to do to visit it is get the appropriate authorization, which many others have successfully done. But this activist group simply invaded the closed military zone without prior authorization, which is why they were simply stopped by civilian security personnel who coordinated with Israeli military forces. Video captured the entire thing, and it was released showing Israeli soldiers merely directing the group to wait for the police to arrive and sort this out. That's all that happened. Now, that is not the highly dramatic story that Representative Khanna has been selling to the public for the last week, telling Fox News, and I quote, "The only reason our lives are saved is because of the excellent work of the American embassy," adding that American lives weren't lost because of that intervention. At this point, the people that he used his position of power to falsely accuse produced video of what actually went down. While Representative Khanna, it should be noted, has not provided any evidence, not a drop of it, to the public to support his wild claims that members of his activist group faced any kind of imminent threat to their lives. But this is what liars do. They throw lies against the wall like spaghetti in the hope that at least a few gullible people will believe them and it will stick in their minds and influence them. For example, Representative Khanna claimed that, quote, "Israeli settlers brandished American-made M4s, detained me and other Americans on my trip to Palestine." But if you go to the tape, the footage shows that the security personnel never brandished anything, not once. They were armed, but their rifles were hung over their shoulders on slings the entire time. And they were never once, not once, drawn, much less pointed at any member of this activist group. Naomi Khan of Regadim, which is an Israeli advocacy group that tracks any illegal Arab construction in Judea and Samaria, rightly said, with evidence on her side, that Representative Khanna used lies about this non-event to create a publicity stunt. That is the non-existent quality of morality that we are now dealing with on the left these days. And because I find that to be unacceptable, they will not be getting another vote from me, and yes, I have voted for them in the past, until this liar infestation, among other things, is cleaned up. They may no longer have any standards, but I still do. And I don't vote for this. On a side note, Ms. Khan pointed out that Khirbet Zanuda, the disputed site that Khanna tried to invade in order to set the scene for the lies that he intended to tell, sits on top of an archaeological site that dates back thousands of years, and it was designated for preservation when Great Britain controlled the area in the mid-20th century, as I already said. Regavim has argued that the unauthorized construction at this site did already damage archaeological remains. Meanwhile, Israeli police also called out Representative Khanna's now thoroughly debunked account of what happened on his trip, pointing out that he and the other troublemaking activists had merely been stopped temporarily for trying to enter a prohibited area without authorization, and that nothing that even could be misconstrued as violence had taken place. They also brought evidence. Police said that their body camera footage showed that the executive director of Breaking the Silence, Nadav Wyman, had previously been warned about invading the restricted area, and that he was informed on video that future violations could very well result in arrest, and all that he needed to do to avoid that was get the authorization. And then, after those warnings, instead of getting the authorization that he was supposed to get, he led the activists to do that very thing and try to unlawfully invade the area again for no reason other than to commit a publicity stunt. The police statement said a review of body-worn camera footage confirms that the group leader was explicitly warned by officers, as this was not his first time violating the closed military zone order. So he knew the deal here. He was issued a final warning that any future violations would result in immediate arrest. So despite Representative Khanna's lying, dramatic claims, the civilian security personnel merely told them, with guns still slung over their shoulders, to wait outside until the authorities arrived. The tape proves it. And when police arrived, Khanna's activist group had the military order restricting access explained to them again, and then they were allowed to leave the site freely without being arrested. Also proven on tape. This is what Representative Khanna tried to sell as the scene that he was lucky to have survived, and wouldn't have if not for the interference from the embassy. You gotta love video footage. What a liar you are, Mr. Khanna. If you want an actual comparison for how this could have gone, I got one for you. When the Daily Wire visited the same site just last summer, a similar civilian security team quickly arrived, met them, confirmed that their reporters had gotten the authorization to be there, and then they let them in. And left them alone. But then again, that's not what the activists wanted to have happen. So they ensured that they did everything they could to try to make something else happen, and when even that didn't cause anything inappropriate to happen, they lied. And now they've been caught and outed because the tapes don't lie. And unfortunately for them, the rest of us have eyes. And those of us with integrity don't like being lied to. The Har Hebron Regional Council, which oversees Israeli communities in the southern Judean hills, stated, despite efforts to portray the incident as a, quote, violent assault, the facts on the ground tell a very different story. Yes, they do. While Representative Khanna, the official, proven liar, declared this should be an outrage to any American citizen. It is, but not in the way you meant to manipulate it into being. The outrage is that you dared to represent us as Americans this way in someone else's country. And you are going to answer for that to the people. Anytime that we get a chance to go into a ballot box that has anything to do with you, sir. Meanwhile, Ms. Khan pointed to the special treatment that Representative Khanna actually received as a congressman, despite his horrific behavior meriting other treatment, saying in any normal country, people who violate the law and trespass are blocked from entering and are detained at the very least, and are then arrested, arraigned, and either held over for trial or released on bail. Foreign agitators are either deported and banned re-entry or sent to prison if there is no treaty with his or her home country. Khanna should have been treated to far less courtesy and hospitality. Yes, he should have. It should also be noted that during his visit, the congressman who represents us, because that's what a congressman does, also went out of his way to meet with Hebron's mayor, Taysir Abu Shinek, or Shinay. Don't know whether I'm pronouncing that right or wrong. I honestly don't give a damn, because this Palestinian official was convicted for his role in a deadly 1980 terrorist attack where, as one of the gunmen, he shot down Jewish worshipers who were returning from Sabbath prayers near Hebron's Cave of the Patriarchs, where their ancestor Abraham is buried, a site which Palestinians have frequently tried to keep Jews from visiting just for spite. 6 people were murdered that day, and 16 more were wounded in the shooting that this man committed. Out of the 6 people who were killed, 2 of them were American citizens, and another one was a Canadian. An Israeli court therefore sentenced Abu Shinay to life in prison for his role as a gunman in that bloody attack on peaceful civilians at worship. Yet he was released 3 years into his life sentence as part of a prisoner exchange between Israel and the PLO, because Israel actually cares about its people. And then after the Oslo Accords were signed, this terrorist was even allowed to return to Judea and Samaria, otherwise known as the West Bank. This is the kind of man that Congressman Khanna went out of his way to make friends with, while, according to the Israeli ambassador to the United States, Michael Letter, Khanna refused the invitation to meet with any of the survivors of the October 7th massacre by Hamas, refused to visit the border communities that were attacked that day, and refuse to hear directly from the families that were affected by the war. But when you've already chosen your narrative, what else is to be expected other than to refuse to even hear the other side? You can't afford to do that if you've already made up your mind. Meanwhile, the rest of us still have our own choice. Is this the way that we want to be represented? Activist stunts, faked, staged international incidents, and someone who lies to the face of the people that elected him? Because if it's not, then you do get a vote in the way that you are represented. Let's use it. And speaking of people who vote for every bad outcome in the books, ruining their own lives just to signal their belonging to a group that I can't figure out for the life of me why you would even want to belong to these days. New York City is struggling just to endure under the rampaging crime that is coming from a massive homeless encampment on the west side of Manhattan that has been allowed to expand and expand, taking over the public streets until it now covers 12 full blocks as drugs, prostitution, and brazen theft run entirely rampant. And residents living in the area are tired of their leaders doing nothing as the situation worsens for them and the encampment continues to grow and take over the lives of everyone else. On Sunday, a city parks enforcement officer simply said, "We can't get rid of them. These ones here are stealing everything. They stole our key for the hose. They stole our ladder. They take what they can. And there are escorts in there too. Prostitutes. I see them. They're right there." The reason that nothing can be done about the growing problem that is holding all of the functional New Yorkers hostage, just for the record, is that the NYPD is no longer authorized to clear out any illegal homeless encampments taking over the streets, thanks to a new measure that was enacted by New York's mayor, Zoran Mamdani. Based on his new measures, the Department of Homeless Services was supposed to manage these encampments. But unsurprisingly, according to the Post, they have yet to do any of the sweeps that they are now responsible for. Big surprise. A situation that we all know is no doubt a feature and not a bug. As a result of this deliberate choice, theft is growing unchecked. Homeless vagrants openly display the expensive electronics that they have stolen from other people as they relax on their stolen furniture. Stolen theater lights from Broadway and even high-end telescopes, what the hell do they need those for, are openly flaunted in this encampment of thieves. They are not just stealing what they need to survive, they're stealing purely for the sake of stealing. And that list of what you can see in the encampment is all from a report by the Post. And nothing is being done, even though you can see the crimes going on, without setting foot into the camp. The open peddling of drugs and prostitution is also growing into a bigger and bigger problem as those in authority refuse to so much as even check it, turning both the tents and public restrooms in the area into very dangerous places for all involved, including the homeless people. One maintenance worker from the Jacob Javitas Center openly stated It stinks. They were setting up in the park at 3 this morning, and it's just too much. It's getting bad again, very bad. We kicked them out. Now they're over here. One thing is for sure, though, there are more today than there were last month. That's for sure. That is because of Mamdani's promise to take a more humane approach to homelessness, which basically means turning your back on them and allowing them to live in a way that is dangerous for them, while also turning your back on all of the productive citizens in your city and allowing the most broken elements of society to hold everyone hostage. As businesses that you actually need for taxes to fund everything leave, and the city sinks under the weight of just too many bad policies, from unreasonably high taxes, which they can get a break from elsewhere, to soft on crime policies and the hamstringing of police who are also leaving, etc., which doesn't go on everywhere else, meaning people have a choice. The only people that are happy with the situation are the criminals. One of these vagrants called Mamdani awesome for stopping the police sweeps that once held all of this in check and permitting the lawless encampment to continue to exist and now thrive and expand and just take over. They're the only ones with rights. The functional people have none. No one else seems to think that it's awesome. A supervisor from the Juventus Center said the scariest parts are on 36th and 37th right now. It's just heroin addicts. Steve Fulop, the president and CEO of the nonprofit Partnership for the City of New York, pointed out that most people would agree that leaving people on the street indefinitely isn't compassion, it's neglect. We've seen in cities like Los Angeles and San Francisco that letting encampments grow unchecked fails the homeless and erodes quality of life for everyone else. Yes, this experiment has been run and we see the outcomes, but the only answer to that is electing politicians who actually care about results more than they do about ideologies. And even aside from the crime victims and the deteriorating quality of life, the economic costs are going to begin to pile up as well. The chair of New York State's Tourism Advisory Council, Christine Nicholas, warned the residents of her state that the encampment doesn't put New York tourism in a positive light. Tourists are forced to walk around in squalor and stench. We want visitors to feel safe and welcome. That may be what you want, but the people that you elected want to do this because they want to try policies that cannot possibly produce any other result other than this. So at the end of the day, they have proven time and again they are not going to change. They're cult members. Meaning the only people that can change are you. And the only way that you can change is to change your vote. It's not easy, but it is simple. And they weren't the only people living this way. The authorities were assaulted by piles of human feces, garbage that was stacked several feet high, and a bug infestation that looked like something out of Men in Black when they entered a home to rescue 16, quote, almost feral children from a house of horrors in Ohio at the end of June. There are photos of all of this from that raid, and those photos have now been released in order to show the truly horrific conditions in which these innocent children were being forced to live. The state of Ohio is planning to give $1 million to fund care for the Siders siblings, the oldest of which is 18 years old, and the youngest of which is only a little over 18 months old. All 16 of them were living together in a 12 by 12 foot area inside of this hellhole, for which prosecutors are intent on putting the children's parents and grandparents behind bars. These poor kids had never been enrolled in school. They are unable to speak. And as I said, they are practically feral animals, and no wonder. To top it all off, it is only by accident that they have been saved from this truly hellish life of abuse. The authorities discovered the 16 siblings living among their own feces in these deplorable conditions when they were there on an unrelated warrant. The children's 33-year-old mother, Elizabeth Siders, their 36-year-old father, Gary Siders Jr., their 73-year-old grandfather, Gary Siders Sr., and their 67-year-old grandmother, Christina Siders, were all placed under arrest and are all rightly facing 16 counts of felony child endangerment. It really does not get any lower than people who do this sort of shit to children. I have empathy for some people, not for child abusers. Not a drop of it. The court records listed the age of most of the children that are involved in this unbelievable case. As I said, the oldest is 18 years old. There was also a 13-year-old, a 14-year-old, a 15-year-old, a 16-year-old, twin 4-year-olds, a 5-year-old, a 6-year-old, an 8-year-old, a 9-year-old, an 11-year-old, and another set of twins that were 20 months old. The age of the other two children were not listed in the charges, according to the reports from WOWK News. According to the court records that were obtained by that news outlet, the children's parents were married in 2008, when their father was 18 and their mother was 15 years old, and the oldest child was born 2 months later. In addition to the 16 children that have been rescued from these disgusting monsters, there was also another set of twin girls who were born in December of 2022 and who died on the same day as their birth. So if you're keeping score, this teenage couple had 18 children in 18 years. Apparently, no one ever explained condoms to them. Ohio's Department of Children and Youth requested a state legislative panel to approve extra funding towards Vinton County, a very rural county, to help the 16 victims in this case. That request is expected to be approved, according to the local news outlet. Vinton County only has a little over 12,000 residents. And so, it also has the smallest budget out of all of Ohio's 88 counties, which is why the state is stepping in to make up the difference in light of this horrific discovery. As you would imagine, these feral children are incredibly messed up from being forced to live together for the last 4 years in that tiny 12 by 12 foot room overflowing with waste. According to the Post, the local authorities said flat out that livestock in their rural community lived in better conditions than these children did. Unfortunately, their grandfather, Gary Sr., had to be released from jail without paying his $300,000 bail because the costs of his medical care behind bars would have actually bankrupted the county. according to the Post. Gary Sr.'s son-in-law, Ronnie Fletcher, told a local news station in Ohio that he didn't know about the horrendous conditions that his own nieces and nephews were living in until he heard about it on the news. He claims that his wife and the couple's other 3 daughters had no idea, none at all, that the home situation had gotten that out of control, which is a suspicious claim to say the least. Okay, so you expect me to believe that you had no idea that these kids had never been sent to school during the last 13 years? You never talked to them? You had no idea, none at all, not even an inkling, that they were living in garbage piles? Because usually, people who live this way have always lived this way. So to be clear, you are telling me that it was entirely different when the 3 sisters were growing up around the same people? Or did you just not want to deal with it enough to even pick up the phone and call Child Protective Services? Because my money is on that scenario. Obviously, I don't know, but that's a hell of a lot more likely. Still, Mr. Fletcher told WOWK, horrified, worried about the kids. It's hard to explain the action when you're distant family. What can I do to help? That was the original reaction to it. Like I said, to answer that question, you could have protected the kids, even if it made your brother-in-law angry, by calling Child Protective Services. That would have been what you could have done. Mr. Fletcher cites distance in the relationship and growing apart over the years due to tensions as the reason that they didn't know what was going on, leading to a decision to focus on their own lives. Meanwhile, the children that were abandoned to these decisions had to be admitted to the hospital because of the dire condition that they were in after being rescued. They will now be placed in the care of others, which will cost the state between $150 and $250 per child per day, according to Ohio's Department of Children and Youth. The Post reported that those daily rates add up to roughly $850,000 a year, which, for the record, is more than 3 times the amount that Benton County budgets towards both children and senior services. That is why the state of Ohio is having to step in. But there have also been donations for the children coming in on Facebook from ordinary people, which has caused the agency in Ohio that is currently responsible for them to consult their attorneys about setting up a trust fund for the 16 children with the money that has been donated for their care. Their parents' attorneys have waived their right to preliminary hearings, so the case has moved straight to a grand jury who has been requested to return an indictment. Their father is also due to appear in court on a separate public indecency charge on July 23rd. Just lovely people all around. In the meantime, on Tuesday, a judge granted the gag order that was requested by his attorney, who argued that the extensive media coverage could prejudice any potential jurors in this very small Ohio community. So we will not be getting any more details for a while. That was not the case on the economic front. Data that was released on Tuesday by the Bureau of Labor and Statistics revealed that for the first time since January, the year-over-year inflation rate fell, dropping down to 3.5% in June. That was the steepest monthly drop since April of 2020 at the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. The analysts were predicting a 0.4% decrease this month, and instead got a 0.7 drop, an improvement which was primarily driven by the lower energy costs from oil prices dropping when the Memorandum of Understanding was reached with Iran. As that is now out the window, after Iran endlessly broke the ceasefire, I would assume that the prices will go back up. Energy prices had risen by almost 11% in March, followed by a 3.8% rise in April, and another 3.9% rise in May, so the 5.7% fall in June was welcome. However, unlikely it is to last. The news was better on the housing front, but not as good as one would like, where shelter costs increased by only 0.1% in June, which was the smallest monthly increase since January of 2021. Food costs rose by 0.2%, which is the same rate that it had declined in May. Recreation costs, which are, of course, a luxury, rose by 0.5%, but the cost of both car insurance and medical care both fell. And the S&P 500, as well as the NASDAQ 100 futures, both jumped after receiving the positive inflation report. Skylar Weinard, the chief investment officer at Reagan Capital, told CNBC, Tuesday's weaker-than-expected CPI print suggests the inflation surge driven by the Iran war is fading. But this may just be a temporary relief as tensions have escalated in recent days. The weaker inflation data likely keeps the Fed on hold for now and reduces any rate hike odds. But we remind investors that almost every communication that has emanated from Chief Warsh during his short tenure so far has been hawkish. And that brings us to the news in the Middle East this week. On Tuesday, during his very first Oval Office meeting with President Trump, Iraq's Prime Minister Ali al-Zaidi announced that American forces are all set to complete their withdrawal from that country by September 30th. That date will mark the end of our military presence in Iraq, which began more than 2 decades ago in 2003 and has evolved significantly since then from its original grounds into the need to combat the insurgent violence of ISIS. All told, more than 4,400 heroic U.S. service members died in Iraq during that time. And now that the country is stable enough to no longer require a significant military presence from the United States in order to maintain order, our relationship with them will shift its focus to economic cooperation, on which subject Trump said, "We don't think we need the military there anymore. We're there to help them. We're there to protect them if need be, but we don't think that's going to be necessary." This endpoint has been coming for a while. The withdrawal began in 2024, with most troops leaving in September of 2025, but some of our forces remained in advisory roles, and they continued to assist in operations against ISIS. Even before that, most of our forces had left in 2011, before approximately 5,000 of those troops returned in 2014 to combat ISIS. Before the latest withdrawal began 2 years ago, there were only about 2,500 troops left in the country. And especially now that Iran, the main destabilizing force in that region, has been significantly weakened by the recent military operations of both the United States military and the Israeli military, the conditions are optimistic enough for the final withdrawal to take place. Trump added that Iraq has tremendous potential because of their oil and because of other things, but because of their oil, and we're going to be doing a lot of deals. We're going to create a lot of jobs for both countries, and we're going to be taking out a lot of oil. A lot of oil is coming out. On that front, the Associated Press says that Iraq is expected to sign an agreement with Chevron, T Capital, and Qatar's UCC to construct a major oil pipeline that will extend from the south to the west of Iraq and continue on to both Turkey's Ceyhan port and to Syria's Banias port. That pipeline is going to transport roughly 2 million barrels of oil per day. Meanwhile, as for the historic meeting itself, Trump had nothing but praise for Prime Minister al-Zayedi, a fellow businessman, saying, "This man is going to be a great leader in the Middle East beyond Iraq. His influence is going to spread all throughout the Middle East." The Prime Minister himself stressed that Iraq's security forces would be fully capable of defending their own country after the U.S. withdraws, and his history makes him credible on that front. In his very first speech before Parliament, Prime Minister al-Zayedi pledged to disarm any militia groups that were rogue crusaders operating outside of Iraqi state control. On July 15th, he and the U.S. Special Envoy for Iraq, Tom Barrack, issued a joint statement outlining plans for the complete disarmament and disbandment of all armed groups and formations operating outside the authority and control of the Iraqi state, eventually giving them until the end of September to comply. That issue remains one that Iraq will have to deal with, given that some powerful factions within their borders maintain very close ties with Tehran. But it is their country to secure or lose after September, and we are definitely rooting for them to succeed. Back over here, there was unfortunately some very sad news to report. On Tuesday, Captain Sully, who famously landed a passenger jet on the Hudson River in 2009 after a bird strike clogged both engines, saving every single one of the 155 lives on board, announced that at the age of 75, he has been diagnosed with the early stages of Alzheimer's disease. He wrote this on his website. "I have been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. It is early stage. For now, this means a name may not come easily to me. I forget a story I have recently told, or I don't sleep as well. But I am in the beginning of this long journey. It is my hope that by sharing this, other families living in the shadows with this disease will feel they too can step forward. And about hope. So many people told us after Flight 1549 that the outcome gave them hope. Lori, my incredible partner of 37 years, says we can all use a little of that hope right now. So this new phase of my life has challenged what it means to be of service, and the answer is to speak up." Captain Sully closed his announcement by saying that Alzheimer's can only affect his memory. It will not prevent him from appreciating whatever future he has alongside his family. And the hero of the Hudson closed with a phrase that has long been associated with Flight 1549, reminding everyone that courage can be contagious. On the complete opposite end of that admirable spectrum, a completely unbelievable gay couple in Canada decided to sue a single mother for more than $500,000 because when she was their surrogate, she refused to have a relatively late-term abortion over a couple of very minor issues that were found on the ultrasound. And I mean very minor, as in basically as minor as it can get. The baby at the center of this pathetic story was deliberately created using a donor egg and one of the men's sperm, and that embryo was then implanted into this surrogate. When she was almost 6 months pregnant, 2 weeks out from being at the end of her second trimester, she told the gay couple that the ultrasound had revealed a cleft lip. A cleft lip, which at worst meant a possible cleft palate, both of which are correctable. And there was also a possible heart issue that was incredibly minor, if it existed at all, which was uncertain. After discovering that the baby that they had deliberately created was not physically perfect, its gay parents wanted to kill their own son over these incredibly minor defects, despite the fact that it was now so far along in the pregnancy that the baby was viable. The surrogate rightly refused to participate in eugenics and murder a baby over something as minor as a cleft lip, the one and only issue that it was actually known to have. Now, the National Post has reported that this truly unbelievable gay couple has filed a lawsuit suing this single mother for emotional distress. And this on top of the fact that after she refused to kill their child, the gay couple also allegedly stiffed her when it came to the reimbursement for her pregnancy-related expenses, lost income, and other costs that she incurred on their behalf, and which they were supposed to pay according to the agreement that they had with her. I don't care what your sexuality is, gay or straight, it really does not get any more entitled than this. No group is above criticism when their behavior is this. And I don't criticize the entire group for the actions of the individuals, but I am not going to spare criticism for the action of the individuals because of the group they belong in either. When she took this gay couple to small claims court to recover the $10,000 that they did owe her under the agreement, this unfathomably immoral and entitled gay couple countersued her for $600,000 for the emotional distress that they claim that they went through because of her refusal to kill their baby boy for having an incredibly minor defect, a cleft lip. Apart from that cleft lip, he was born healthy, by the way. No thanks to them. Their surrogate said, "You know I'm a single mom. You know I have a daughter. And you're basically suing me for my house. It seems very shitty. It's just awful. I feel used. They didn't get the perfect child they wanted, and they threw me away." In Canada, surrogacy works differently than it does here. Women cannot be paid the exorbitant amounts for surrogacy that they often are in the United States. So they are only allowed to be reimbursed for their pregnancy-related expenses in order to keep this practice from becoming the terrible industry that it has, unfortunately, devolved into. So the incredible thing that this woman did for these two men was not a case of profit. This was a case of one woman trying to do something amazingly generous for other people who were unable to have children of their own. And out of dozens of requests that she received, she specifically chose to help this gay couple for some reason. Yet after she told them about the one and only known defect, a minor cleft lip, and the two potential other defects that the baby turned out not to have, a possible cleft palate and a possible minor heart defect, the gay couple apparently determined, quote, "Considering that medical tests indicate that the fetus has or is likely to have a genetic, chromosomal, or other abnormality or defect, and in accordance with Article 8.5a of our surrogacy agreement, we want to inform you of our wish that the pregnancy be terminated. Although very difficult, this decision is free and informed. I'm going to take your word for that and judge you accordingly. Some things in society actually deserve to be judged. I know we live in an age where nobody's supposed to be judged for being atrocious human beings, but it's time to bring the judgment back, people. Things have to be in balance. Some things deserve to be judged. They need to be judged. They need to be shamed. This would be one of them. Not that you use judgment and shaming for everything, but for some things, it actually is appropriate. This would be one of them. The surrogate said that this callous coldness towards one's own child over such minor and correctable flaws left her a devastated mess. She refused to terminate the pregnancy that was at the end of its second trimester and ended up delivering a baby boy via an at-home birth, which also upset this spiteful gay couple because they wanted the baby to be delivered in a hospital, which once again is beyond entitled, considering what they actually wanted was for their baby to be killed instead of delivered. But if they weren't going to get their way, then they were going to be control freaks about things that had no bearing on them in order to amp up the claims of their so-called emotional distress. It should also be noted that the at-home birth was part of the original agreement that they had signed on to in the original surrogacy plan. Between cases like this, of which there are many, plus cases of actual pedophiles who have been arrested for having a surrogate carry a baby that they were found online in chat rooms talking about being excited to bring the baby home from the hospital so that they could immediately rape it, the child trafficking cases, and all of the rest of it, surrogacy is becoming more and more controversial these days. What once was a situation where a loving, married couple that could not biologically have children had their sister carry a baby for them has now turned women into dehumanized, rented wombs for entitled people and children with their own human souls into products to be purchased like accessories. And it is attracting the very worst people in the world to parenting for all of the wrong reasons by turning the entire thing into a transaction in which these people who are too selfish to actually be parents prey on the poor and dehumanize the child that they have bought like a slave, brought into this world, turning them into a prop for politically motivated videos online, which often have explicitly sexual content to them as well, like the gay couple that went viral for asking their daughter about which of her fathers was more horny. And I'm talking about a toddler-age daughter here, not that it would be inappropriate for any age of a daughter. Or the gay couple that was publicly shaming their infant for being homophobic because his first word was mama, like every baby. The prevalence of outcomes like these are the reason why more and more people are getting involved in this conversation each time another horrific story of child sacrifice makes headlines. The pro-life activist Lila Rose posted about this lawsuit on Tuesday, writing, "A same-sex couple is suing their surrogate for $600K after she refused to abort their baby at 22 weeks in Canada. Scans indicated the child had a cleft lip and a possible heart defect. The little boy was born healthy. That child is alive today, not because of the men who purchased his life, but because the woman who carried him in her womb protected him. Children are not commodities. Ban surrogacy now." A call which I once strongly disagreed with. But after so many stories of innocent children paying the costs, I now actually support that. I have nothing but profoundly heartfelt sympathy for those who want children and don't have them. I'm one of those people. But there is always adoption for most people. And if I have to choose between looking out for other adults that want kids and looking out for the kids that are winding up in terrible situations, then I choose the kids. If it's all or nothing, and it apparently is because we have to be fair in all ways, then so be it. If it's all or nothing, then I choose the kids. According to the Post, the gay couple declined to comment on their atrocious behavior, from trying to kill their own son over what turned out to be nothing, to stiffing their surrogate for the financial costs of giving them their son, to suing her as a single mother and trying to make her and her daughter homeless just to round out their unbelievably selfish spree of spite. I don't know that I've ever felt more sorry for a child than I do for their poor son. And they were not the only Canadians to find out what earning the disdain of the world felt like. A different Canadian learned the hard way that taking political rage way too far out here in the real world carries some actual consequences to it, including a possible one-way ticket out of our country, hun. Caitlin Tracy, a 33-year-old Canadian living in Asbury Park, apparently decided to physically assault American children in their own country after she lost control like an internet freak on the Point Pleasant Beach boardwalk on the Jersey Shore during the 4th of July weekend and slapped one of our kids because as a guest in our country, she didn't approve of their wardrobe. And this Canadian bitch actually filmed what she did as she confronted 4 teenage girls who were minding their own business in their own country on July 3rd because this Canadian was triggered that 2 of our kids were wearing patriotic sweatpants that also had the words Trump and ICE on them, which I hate to point out they had every right to do if they wanted to. I understand you don't have this in Canada, but here they are free to express their opinions in their country, even if their fellow American does not agree with their opinion, much less just because some Canadian disapproves. So again, as a guest in our country, yes, the world is not yours, you entitled little brat. A guest who is not entitled to have any say whatsoever in our politics, Caitlin Tracy decided that she not only had the right to her own opinion, which of course she does, but that she also has the right to dictate to our kids what they can and cannot do in their own country. That's how entitled she is. So she went up to them and began filming herself. That's how proud she was of what she was doing. Filming herself, aggressively confronting them over the wardrobe choice that was not any of her damned business. And when tempers flare, she slapped one of the underage girls in the face. Security footage was used by the cops to track down this entitled Canadian and she was hit with a laundry list of charges, rightly so, including endangering the welfare of a child, assault, harassment, and obstruction of justice. But that was just the beginning of the deserved consequences for this brat. Due to her criminal decision to physically assault our kids on their own streets, ICE agents picked her up and threw her into Delaney Hall Detention Center in Newark. Because, newsflash, we don't need to be importing this. There are good people in the world. Every single immigrant that comes in here should be a law-abiding immigrant who understands and agrees to the principles on which this country was founded and which we outlined for them and everyone else in our Constitution, free speech and freedom of expression being the very first one. Apparently, Caitlin Tracy's husband is illiterate because Matthew Garroni, who calls himself the clown of Asbury Park, which is no doubt true, where he regularly mocks conservatives in their own country, seems to be confused on the principles of this country. And he raced online to make his entirely invalid case to the meaningless jury of TikTok, where he begged his 140,000 followers for help, while conveniently leaving out the part where his wife slapped an American child over their choice of pants, acting as though she had been picked up for no reason whatsoever in an ICE raid or something. Even GoFundMe pulled the page that was taking donations for her legal fees after MAGA reported on the facts of what had happened here, which again are all on video. This is not a he said versus she said. There's video. There always is. And these 4 teenage girls were not the first people to be physically assaulted by leftists having outbursts over other people wearing red hats or flying American flags, which whether you agree with or not, whether you want to do yourself or not, they have every right to do that. You are not the only person in the world. You are not the only free person in the world. Other people have freedom of choice, and they get to do things even if you don't like those things, as long as they're not crimes, which seems to be exactly where you can't seem to figure it out. Because the only time you think you have freedom is when it comes to breaking the law, which is the one place you actually don't have freedom. Just 2 months ago, we covered the story of the 69-year-old Army veteran, Carrie Sharon, who, as a veteran, had flags flying at his patriotic home in Escondido, California, outside of San Diego, a big Navy base, where his private residence was locally known as the Trump House, outside of which he was beaten to death in his own front yard by another leftist having a violent political tantrum. In August of 2019, a man was jumped and beaten outside of a bar in Portland, Oregon by 2 leftist thugs, all because he was wearing a MAGA hat, which he gets to do. I don't own any MAGA stuff, but I have a right to if I choose to. And in July of 2018, a teenager in San Antonio, Texas, had a MAGA hat ripped off of his head and soda thrown in his face at a Whataburger by another outraged leftist with no self-control that this kid was not bothering in any way. Grow the bleep up. Even some leftist members of law enforcement have been caught breaking the laws that they are supposed to be protecting and upholding, mangling them instead over their personal political outrage. Once again, grow the bleep up. A federal appeals court ruled that the Trump supporters that were attacked at a 2016 campaign rally in San Jose could sue the local police for what they did, which was to deliberately funnel them into a hostile mob of anti-Trump protesters as the cops who had forced them into that situation stood by and watched them being pummeled with garbage and other objects that were being thrown at them. As for this Canadian, who thought that she could come into our country, and yes, sweetie, it is our country. Your ancestors said we don't want nothing to do with the revolution and fled up to Canada. As for this Canadian, who thought she could come into our country, lose control like a repulsive child, and commit physical violence against our kids, when she disagrees with their politics, they're kids. They don't know their politics. She will have her next day in court on August 4th if Uncle Sam doesn't rightly boot her ass back to the tundra of Canada before then, which I hope they do. And by the way, when I call her a guest, that was me being generous. She's here illegally. Big surprise. People that think that they are entitled to break the law think that they are entitled to break the law. I don't understand why this confuses people. I really don't. It's very simple, very predictable, and there are multiple cases every week that prove it. And speaking of serious problems that the left has deliberately cultivated at the expense of everyone, on Monday, a Texas man who was very, very active in the fringe furry culture was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison for transporting a minor across state lines to a furry convention in Georgia, where he, unsurprisingly, sexually abused this child. And no doubt we're supposed to pretend that we're shocked and surprised by this, when in actual fact we all know that there is a disproportionate representation of pedos inside of kink communities. That doesn't mean that every person involved in kinky stuff takes it all the way to raping a child, but it does mean that the people that are into perverted stuff in the first place are way, way more likely to be perverts that are involved in kinky stuff related to kids. We all know this. We have known it for all of human history. And I'm not going to pretend anymore that we don't actually know the things that we already know. Something that we will circle back around to in a moment. As for this pedo, 37-year-old Joseph Robertson pled guilty to taking this minor out of Frisco, Texas, and transporting them all the way to Atlanta, Georgia, for this kinky furry convention. And yes, it was kinky. We will get into that in a moment. Now he's been sentenced, and after he serves 20 years in prison for what he did, he will be on parole for the rest of his life as a sex offender. So let's circle back around to the things that we all know, but nobody's willing to say. I would point out that in many ways, this particular kink culture of furries seems to be geared by design towards children. The people who engage in it create elaborate cartoon animal personas. They're not just animal personas. They are cartoonized, childized. They don't dress up like an actual dog, like your pit bull. No, they dress up like Blue's Clues. They wear elaborate costumes that often seem to be designed to be enticing to children. In fact, many of the people who participate in this culture are children because that's who they're recruiting. And some furry conventions also include adult-oriented vendors, to put it mildly, which is obviously going to attract a very specific type of adult. Robinson had commissioned a red and white, full-body animal costume for the very convention that he took this kidnapped child to, according to the reports from NBC Dallas-Fort Worth. The Justice Department stated, while at the convention, Robinson sexually abused the child by engaging in acts that would constitute child molestation and sodomy under Georgia state law. Additionally, Robinson purchased sexual stimulants and devices at the convention. That would be the part I said we would circle back around to. And, he's talking about at the convention here, commissioned artwork depicting his furry persona engaged in sex acts with the minor victim. And apparently the artist was just like, okie dokie. You know, if this was just one bad apple, which some people are going to try to claim, then why did none of this raise any red flags for all of the other adult good apples at the convention? We all know the answers to these questions. And I am not willing to turn a blind eye to what we all know this fringe group actually is. And by turning a blind eye, allow kids to be abused just because most people in our culture won't come out and call the people in the Barney costumes plus bondage gear what we all know they are, pedos. The U.S. Attorney, Jay Combs, also rightly labeled Robinson's conduct as depraved, saying, most children's experiences with people in costumes as animals comes in the context of fun encounters at theme parks. Right. This defendant turned a furry costume into a nightmare of sexual abuse. He also pointed out that given the very adult nature of this particular furry convention, where bondage gear and sexual stimulants were being sold along with sexual artwork, it was disturbing that any child was present in that kind of atmosphere, saying it shocks the conscience that a child was allowed into a convention where adults were dressed up as furry animals and sex devices were being sold. Not one person in that convention contacted the authorities to protect the child. Every child deserves security, dignity, and a community that stands fiercely in their defense. Protecting children is one of our most solemn responsibilities, and we will act ferociously against anyone who threatens their safety. But once again, no one is surprised that not even a single one of these adult furry pervs who saw this child being hauled around this place tried to protect the child. Not one. Like I said, we all know why. And I am not going to pretend otherwise anymore in the name of tolerance. Because tolerance of this is coming at the expense of kids. So the adults are just going to have to cope with whatever they have to cope with and keep their kink in their bedrooms and away from kids on the streets. You know, we were told for years, stay out of our bedrooms. I agree with that. Keep your bedrooms in your bedrooms. Quit bringing them out onto the streets and quit coming after kids, or you are going to face the same consequences as everybody else. I'm not going to pretend that this shit is not what it is anymore. No. It should be noted that this case was prosecuted as a part of the Justice Department's Project Safe Childhood initiative, which targets the growing exploitation and abuse of children by deviants. And yes, anyone who sexually abuses a child is a deviant. I don't care if it's not a nice name, it's an accurate name, and I will call those people, the ones who sexually abuse children, what they are. I will not mask the awful things they do behind polite language. And because I have freedom of speech, you can't do a damn thing about it. Unfortunately, there was more sad news involving children this week. On Wednesday, the Democrat Congresswoman, Debbie Dingell, announced that she would need to return home to Michigan because of the tragic death of her 12-day-old great-granddaughter. She posted this online. Today, I am returning home to be with my family during an incredibly painful and deeply personal time. Our family's 12-day-old daughter, granddaughter, and great-granddaughter has returned home to God this afternoon. We have been in God's hands throughout all of this. While I had planned to be present for votes today and tomorrow, my family needs me now. In moments like this, there is no greater responsibility than being by the side of those we love, offering comfort, support, and remembrance. I agree. The 72-year-old Congresswoman took her husband's congressional seat in 2015, so she and her family are very well known there, and her colleagues were quick to share their own messages of support online. For example, New York's Republican Congressman Mike Lawler posted, "Sending our deepest condolences to Debbie, keeping her granddaughter and the entire Dingell family in our prayers." Michigan's Democrat Party also responded by posting, "Our deepest sympathies, thoughts, and prayers are with the Dingell family during this difficult time." And I hope that all of us will join them in that. You know, some things just transcend politics. Some things are just more important. They make politics completely irrelevant. And then there are other cases where the politics is very relevant. And there was news of another kind about the Democrat candidate for Arizona's 6th Congressional District, Joanne Mendoza. The New York Post reported that she is following multiple OnlyFans prostitutes, plus multiple witchcraft accounts, and multiple sexually explicit content producers on her campaign's official Instagram account. I understand we're all desensitized to this, but we shouldn't be. Stop to notice how bizarre that actually is. Even a couple of years ago, people would have tried to hide this sort of shit. If you're weird, you at least knew you were weird and didn't, fly your weird flag out in public. That's your business. Okay, when you've taken tolerance to such a degree that people don't even know that unhealthy shit is unhealthy, and there are no standards for even the people who will represent us, that, they should be stable people who have their shit together, you've taken it too far. Regardless of whether it's shocking, I'm not trying to get outrage here. I'm just trying to point out it's bizarre that our society has been in the hot water with the heat being turned up till we're boiling, to the point that we don't notice it's hot anymore. Because there's just too much of this. Okay, we have to deliberately choose to notice this stuff. And notice how completely bizarre it would have been a couple of years ago. And maybe be a little bit frightened about the fact that they've been able to manipulate your reactions to that degree. If nothing else, that should concern you. Even if what she's doing doesn't concern you, the fact that the way you would have reacted a handful of years ago versus the way you react now didn't come from you. You've been conditioned. That should scare the crap out of you. Meanwhile, Mendoza is even now in a dead-heat toss-up race with the incumbent Republican Congressman Juan Ciscomani. I apologize if I'm mispronouncing your name. And that's despite the fact that she is apparently unhinged enough to have followed dozens of different accounts that were explicitly for sharing extremely sexual content and witchcraft practices. And again, she was not following them on her private accounts. She was following them on her official campaign accounts. What in the world has happened to the Democrat Party, where these people that they would not have been caught dead with even 1 decade ago, because they are so weird and unhealthy and they knew how the public would react to them, are now not only their associates, not only are they publicly celebrated by the party, but they are also the only kind of candidates that Democrats have to offer to be leaders of our cities, states, and nation. I'm just going to point out, you could not have found candidates like these anywhere in the Democrat Party if you tried during Obama's first term. There were no Graham Plattners then, no Zoran Mamdanis, no Abdul Ed Saids, no campaigning with Hassan Pikers. I mean, people rarely pause to notice how quickly that this radical change has come about. But it's truly unhinged, disconnected, and bizarrely unhealthy that in a system that only has 2 parties to begin with, one of them has become this in a matter of years. I mean, if you want a prime example, go pull up the debate in Maine for Graham Plattner's replacement. You will not find a more bizarre group of misfits, and I don't say that to mock them. I mean, like, listening to their answers, they don't live on the same planet as everyone else. As the options that are being put forward to replace Graham Plattner. I mean, apparently Graham Plattner actually was the best option they had in Maine. The guy with an SS tattoo who fantasized, according to his girlfriends, about wishing he had a home invader so that he could rape the guy, not because he's gay. That would be creepy. But because that's how one man shows another man he's dominant. And when he couldn't rape another man, he just apparently did creepy things in porta potties because that environment turns him on. And then, allegedly, according to his girlfriend, who has very credible stories to back all of this up, raped her instead. That actually was the most stable person they could find up there. What is going on in Maine? What is going on in the Democrat Party? It is time to notice how weird it is. According to the Post, one of Mendoza's campaign accounts, one of the X-rated follows on her campaign account, was a transgender socialist activist, because that is the combo platter these days, named Brianna Westbrook, who made posts with BDSM gear and sex toys. Those posts were what was being followed on this woman's campaign page. And then after the report came out, the campaign account did unfollow that particular person. Because it finally dawned on them that they are the weird ones and that the rest of the public goes, what the bleep is this? Mendoza's campaign account also followed 2 OnlyFans prostitutes, because one is just not enough people, who were also unfollowed after the report brought all of this to the public's attention, where the normal people still live. There was also a porn account featuring adult images for those 18 and over on Patreon that was being followed on the campaign page. And on top of all of her professional, because it was her campaign page, patronage of sexually explicit adult material, Mendoza also followed several accounts that centered entirely around bizarre witchcraft, including following Instant Witch, Mystic Primrose, Eden Energy Medicine, and Crystal Spirit Readings, who featured content on beginner witch tips, schools for witches, reading energy colors, and practicing psychic readings. I mean, I'm just going to point out the obvious here. I know we're all used to this, but it doesn't change the reality just because you're used to the reality. This person is actually mentally unhealthy. That is the only kind of person that is attracted to this stuff, are people who are mentally unhealthy. And you should actually want the people that are in positions of power to be mentally sound. I know that's controversial, but it wasn't until 5 seconds ago. Mendoza also followed Sarah Elkhaldy, the alchemist. The alchemist, who, according to the New York Post, is apparently a leader of the esoteric arts and who teaches her students how to manifest their evolutionary potential. You know, like when she isn't turning cereal to gold. You cannot make this stuff up. I mean, you can't even do parody anymore. Saturday Night Live just needs to go off the air because the headlines are Saturday Night Live. What has happened? You do have a choice in whether this continues or not. You actually do. If you vote for it, it will continue. If you vote against it, they will say, oh shit, we're not going to be in power unless we pretend to be normal. That would be a good thing. So decide what you want and vote accordingly. After this news story, not like the Babylon Bee, but news story came out, one that is so kooky that a few years ago, it would have actually been a story in the National Enquirer, right next to someone spots Elvis eating a peanut butter and banana sandwich in a diner in Kansas. But thanks to Democrats, these are our actual news headlines about world leaders these days. Mendoza's campaign accounts started unfollowing some of their X-rated porn follows and some of the witchcraft accounts that they were following too. But the post had already captured screenshots. Unbelievable. But that was not the end of the problems for the Democrats this week coming from their own candidates. You're going to love this one. Minnesota's Democrat governor, Tim Walz, you remember him, the weirdest man to ever grace a political stage. The one with the arms that blow around like those creatures outside of a used parking lot, decided to double down after receiving widespread criticism by defending his decision to pardon a repeat child rapist in order to shield said repeat child rapist from deportation, even though he was, thankfully, deported anyway last week, despite the Democrats' best efforts, which should be remembered and held against them. As we have covered before, this illegal repeatedly raped a 10-year-old little girl, did not deny it, but attacked the police for having a problem with it because he declared to them that it was a cultural thing, which I'm going to assume is not true, but for the sake of this argument, let's pretend that it is. Then your culture sucks, dude. If your culture centers around raping 10-year-old girls, then yeah, my culture is better than yours. I know we're not allowed to say it, but at that point it would just be a fact. And then the child rapist blamed the 10-year-old victim, saying that the police should be arresting her too. Okay, that's the guy we're talking about here. He got a very light sentence for repeatedly raping a 10-year-old, getting 8 months in a correctional workhouse because the raped little girl's family pressured her to not cooperate with the prosecution. And then, when our federal government rightly decided that we did not actually need to be importing unrepentant, repeat child rapists, and were about to deport him for his crimes on our soil, as the law allows for the obvious reasons, Tim Walz and other Minnesota Democrats stepped in to do everything they possibly could to try to stop even this kind of immigrant from being deported. A move which did not go over well with mainstream America. But this is how out of touch that party has actually become. And it's important to realize that, because there is only one way to make them change. You have to be willing to temporarily hit them very hard with votes until they decide to get the message. Case in point, on Tuesday, Walz reacted to the done deal deportation that has already taken place of Tao Lu Vang, a national of Laos, despite his very best, unbelievably extreme efforts to keep this child rapist here and endanger other children by saying that people should not be judged by our worst day. Okay, I've talked slowly to people before, but I'm going to have to slow this down to like a record on half speed. When your worst day involves raping a kid, yes, you absolutely should be judged by your worst day, Gomer Pyle. That's an insult to Gomer Pyle. I'm sorry. And by the way, it wasn't one day, Governor. He kept on raping this 10-year-old little girl again and again on multiple different occasions, keeping it up for 2 years, Timmy. Yes, he absolutely should be judged for that. And he expressed a defiant lack of remorse for All of it. But this left-wing lunatic, I don't know what else to call it, still could not fathom that he was the one in the wrong here for protecting the raping pedophile over protecting the raped child. And he tried to act like the people who had deported the child rapists were the ones in the wrong, saying they made that choice. Yeah, we did, and we're proud of it. I guess the question I would ask is, did that make us any safer? Yes, it did, actually. Did that make the children that are left behind any more stable? Yes, it did. Did it improve the idea that we can't be judged by our worst day? Again, Tim, none of us raped a 10-year-old child on our worst day, did you, Governor? Because I can't really come up with another reason why you would honestly not understand the difference. You're prompting a lot of questions here. Wall said that because this pedophile now has a family of his own, it's unfair to deport him. No one with a family can be deported. Not even for repeatedly raping a child again and again, consistently, for 2 long years. A family is supposed to be a get-out-of-jail-free card. And your neighbor's kids are just going to have to deal with being raped. Because better that than for an adult parent to get deported for their crimes. So, just to be clear, all that any awful person has to do to avoid consequences, a terrorist, a cartel member, a serial killer, a human trafficker, all they have to do to ensure that they can never be deported for it is to pop out a kid? That sounds brilliant, gym teacher. So, to be clear, he created the problem by being all for reckless immigration policies. He exacerbated the problem by creating a justice system in Minnesota where a grown man who repeatedly rapes a 10-year-old for 2 years gets 8 months in a workhouse for it. And then he claims that if we take issue with leaving things that way, we are actually obligated to endanger other children through all of his mishandling of his leadership role, because we're bad people if we don't, and it's better to endanger other children than it is to deport an adult who might have children, said children might be citizens, and who therefore might have to temporarily choose between staying here without him or going with him. Far better that we just allow other innocent children to be raped than someone else has to make a choice. He just doesn't get it. He really doesn't. This is the way that his mind actually works. I know that's hard to accept because it's unfathomable that anyone's mind actually works this way, but his really does. Which is why no one in their right mind voted to make this man the vice president of our country. He actually said, quote, "In many cases, their children are citizens, and by just picking them up and taking them out with no due process, it just seems unfair." No, what is unfair is deliberately allowing through your choices, children to be raped by people that were imported into this country in order to make out-of-touch, ivory-tower Democrats like you have even one invalid reason to feel good about yourselves. You know, you could actually just do good things. It's easier. A lot less collateral damage. You might try it. And by the way, Timmy, he had due process. He had a trial. And his immigration case was heard by an immigration judge who removed his legal status years ago. That right there is due process. Do you not understand the words due process? I mean, we can send you to an English class, gym teacher. But who cares about the facts when you can pretend that you're on the side of the victim, meaning the illegal pedophile, which is why the Democrat governor was joined by the Democrat Attorney General, Keith Ellison, and by the Democrat Supreme Court Chief Justice, Natalie Hudson, in ruling that Vang should be pardoned for raping a child, citing specifically concerns that he would be deported for it, and arguing that deporting him would, quote, not be in the best interest of society. So A, I would like to point out, this is not just Tim Walz being insane. This is uniform throughout the Democrat Party. And two, I would like to ask them a question. It's not in the best interest of society. One word for you. How? Name one way that it is not in the best interest of society. I know that it's easy to just throw claims out there and no one's supposed to actually ask you to back them up. But I'm asking you to actually back it up. Because it seems to me like it is absolutely in the best interest of society to have fewer pedophiles here. Seems to me that it is absolutely in the best interest of society to give a child rapist spot to an immigrant who actually wants to contribute instead of raping children. There are 9 billion people on this planet. They cannot all live in the United States. That one fact alone means that spots are limited. For every spot that you give to this guy, somebody else doesn't get in. Giving the spots to people who are not slime pedophiles is, yes, in the best interest of society. It is absolutely in the best interest of society to make our streets safer, where kids can play on them again, which they used to be able to do. It is absolutely in the best interest of society to prioritize the most vulnerable among us. Children, not pedos, for the record, because you seem to be confused about that, over the criminals. Especially foreign criminals that we've gone out of our way to import here. So having made my case, please tell me one way, even one, that it is in the best interest of society to keep a child rapist here on the streets of this country. I'm just going to point out to everyone, on one side of the aisle, you've got Marco Rubio, the son of Cuban immigrants who loves this country because he knows the alternative, coherently saying that this is not the kind of immigrant that we need, which is why he personally deported his ass out of here, which I cheer him on for. And let's be honest, every sane person out there is doing the same. There is no reason why you would be against this kind of immigrant being deported, even if you're against all of the others being deported, unless you're insane. And on the other side of the aisle, you have people that will actually endanger countless children in order to keep even this kind of immigrant here, making it perfectly clear through their repeat actions that in their mind, no kind of immigrant can ever be deported for any reason, no matter what they have done. Because, what is worse than this? If you can't deport someone for this, you can't deport them for anything. That is what they are saying. And the rest of his party, I would point out, who takes equally insane positions, proudly put the Democrat who does this man, forward as the man who should be in line to run the entire country as vice president and then be president after that, declaring him to be a model for all other men to turn themselves into and follow. The very image of non-toxic masculinity? I can't think of a better image of toxic non-masculinity. And neither could anyone else. Which is why, despite all of the gaslighting and pretending and shaming, no man voted for this. And no straight woman either. The Democrat Party has actually gone insane. It actually has. Look at what they do. Look at the candidates that they are putting forward. It has actually gone insane. And it is vital that the American public realize that this is the time to let them know definitively how we, the people, feel about that. I would point out that if you were to send them a message in the midterms, the kind of election that matters less than any other kind, not that it doesn't matter, but it matters less than any other kind, you might not even have to do the same thing in the next presidential election, because they might actually put forward someone who's not bat crap crazy and give us an actual choice. Or you can keep encouraging them to be crazy, keep alienating more people, and lose by default. I don't get what they're doing here. I really don't. And as if the Democrat Party was intent on proving this week how crazy they are being, the Daily Wire reported on an investigation that was conducted by the American Association of Pro-Life OBGYNs. So these are professionals. You may disagree with their politics, but that doesn't change the fact that they are professionals in this field, who proved that insanely leftist activist groups such as Aid Access, a name you need to get familiar with, are so equally out of their minds that they will and did send out dangerous abortion pills despite an insane number of red flags being deliberately waved in front of their faces to see what they would do. An investigator from the American Association of Pro-Life OBGYNs, doctors, wanted to see how this activist group would respond to a truly extreme case. So they made it as extreme as they possibly could. And she told this leftist activist group that she was a 13-year-old girl who had already had 3 C-section births and was currently on other complicating medications, and then asked them to ship her abortion pills. The pills arrived on her doorstep in Indiana right away. No questions asked, no safety being practiced to make sure that this irresponsible 13-year-old girl, because you are irresponsible if you've been pregnant 3 times by 13, to make sure that she didn't bleed out in a bathroom somewhere. This was just unfettered extremism cranked up to 100 miles an hour because that's the only way that they know how to go about anything. And this is what happens when you let them do that. When you let those kind of people take over an entire party. And that party is in power in certain places. After what happened during their exploration of any non-existent, it turns out, safety rails, the American Association of Pro-Life OBGYNs, AAPLOG, wrote a letter to Republican lawmakers this week which stated, what this investigation uncovered is far from anything that could be called health care. In fact, it should be considered medical malpractice. Now, just for some background here, thanks to Biden, the restrictions that did used to exist as guardrails around mail-order abortion pills, which required the patient to be seen in person at a real doctor's appointment first, were obliterated for no reason. And as a result, there have been many cases of boyfriends pretending to be women online, which they were able to do because no in-person appointment was required first, and then ordering the abortion pills online and drugging their pregnant girlfriends against their will. Yeah, this is great for women having the right to choose what happens to their bodies. That reckless and entirely unnecessary decision has never been reversed to bring things back to the status quo of just a few years ago, where doctors are required to be involved in the administration of this drug, which is done directly to patients when doctors are involved, instead of distributing the drug to anyone that's hiding on the other side of a screen for nefarious reasons. Okay, I don't care what your stand on abortion is for the context of this conversation. If you actually want women to have the choice instead of abusers, and you don't want activists doing dangerous things with kids, then you should be for having to go to a simple doctor's appointment. What is the case against it? The investigator, Dr. Christina Francis, the one who was posing as a 13-year-old girl, the 13-year-old girl who had already had 3 C-sections, also told Aid Access on their intake form that the child that she was pretending to be was on blood thinners. I mean, in case you don't understand, abortion pills make you bleed massively. That she also had an intrauterine device and a history of ectopic pregnancies. Like I told you, they went all out to make this as glaringly extreme as possible. Not one of those contraindicated conditions deterred Aid Access from shipping out the highly dangerous pills to this uninformed 13-year-old minor. They arrived 4 days after they were ordered with this troubling information. Dr. Francis reported that Aid Access did not ask for any ID verification, which is how abusive boyfriends are getting their hands on this dangerous drug and using it against unwilling women. They also required no confirmation at all that the recipient was even pregnant, or any indication that she had had a consultation with any kind of medical professional, despite this activist group claiming, obviously falsely, on their website that they would have a medical professional review the answers on their medical questionnaire. But any true medical professional would have balked at the things that were listed on that intake form in this case. Things that are so glaring that all of us know their problems, proving that the guardrails are a bunch of entirely fictional smoke. Within 2 minutes of filling out and submitting her form as this 13-year-old girl, Dr. Francis received a follow-up email with payment information and no indication that anyone had reviewed the medical information during those 2 intervening minutes. Extremist liars is the pattern emerging over and over again in all of these stories. It's okay for me to lie to you in order to accomplish my political ends. The American Association of Pro-Life OBGYNs told lawmakers in their letter to test the level of medical review and due diligence. We intentionally put red flags in our answers with several contraindications so ridiculous any one of them should have been a hard stop for a physician conducting an in-person screening and informed consent. However, we were shockingly allowed to complete the process. The intake process did not include a live consultation with a medical professional, such as what would happen with a telehealth visit. Even an asynchronous review of the user's health information did not occur, as the payment link was emailed less than 2 minutes after the request was submitted. And the abortion pills were sent from a generic address in California, not a professional one, which also does not speak to any sort of quality safety controls being practiced by this incredibly irresponsible extremist activist group who only cares about their crusading cause and not about the literal blood that they spill. AAPLOG warned that this recklessness enables young children, like the one that they were pretending to be, who are nowhere near informed, to access pills that can be deadly, and doing so incredibly easy, as well as enabling abusers to take away a woman's right to choose, when simple guardrails could correct this. As I said, several men across this country have been charged with inflicting forced abortions on unwilling women using the abortion pills that they ordered online from irresponsible groups like this one. They are not heroes protecting women the way that they try to position themselves as being. They are actual enablers of the abusers, and they're monsters. The AAPLOG is asking lawmakers to use their power to restore common sense and the basic safeguards that we had just a couple of years ago to mail-order abortion pill industry, regulating distribution in the way that it was always regulated before Joe Biden. This is not new. It's just go back to sanity. In order to protect both women and babies from the soulless activists who don't care about the human damage that they cause as long as they get their way. They prove over and over again that that is all that they care about. And speaking of other kinds of horrific damage that are likewise entirely avoidable and thus optional, it's being deliberately decided to allow this. Horrific surveillance video showed 6 armed teenagers surrounding a 74-year-old man on July 7th outside of a 7-Eleven convenience store in Baltimore and brutally assaulting him for a prolonged period of time. One of these young black males was carrying a gray assault rifle. Another one of them had a sword. Welcome to extreme crime in blue cities that refuse to stop going soft on it. That's the optional part. The Baltimore Police Department is currently conducting a manhunt for these 6 thugs who like to beat up on elderly senior citizens. What lowlifes! Oh, we're so impressed. And police are asking for the public's help to identify these sword-wielding brutes. Anyone with information about them is asked to call the citywide robbery detectives at 410-366-6311. One more time, that is 410-366-6311. As for the video, it shows a young man dressed in a black hoodie running up to this man in his 70s and shoving an assault rifle in his face. The impressive old man stood his ground, even as 5 more thugs formed a mob and tried to break into his car and rob him. Then the thugs started throwing things at the 74-year-old man for no reason, and one of them ran up from behind, of course, because they're cowards, and shoved him to the ground. But even then, while he was lying on the pavement, knowing that panic and fear would only make it worse, like blood in the water, this old man refused to stop fighting for his life. On his back, he kicked and fought back while trying to shield his face from the barrage of punches that were being thrown by these criminal oppressors. And yes, they are oppressors. Because oppression is not determined by the color of your skin, whatever you've been told, but by your actions. And when you have an elderly person on the ground and you are beating them up, you are definitionally the oppressor in that situation. The rules do not change based on the amount of melanin in your skin. Thankfully, their elderly victim had only minor injuries, according to the reports from CBS News. Meanwhile, the reality on the ground is that crime continues to plague the deep blue city of Baltimore and other deep blue cities just like it. And on Wednesday, the Baltimore Sun reported that most of their residents do not feel safe and are demanding a crackdown on crime from their local authorities. I empathize, but I also have to point out they seem to be confused, because the crackdown will have to come from them in the form of changing their votes, at the very least temporarily, in order to put people in power who are willing to crack down. You can't deliberately choose to elect the people who tell you right up front that they are not willing to crack down on crime, and then be upset when they don't crack down on crime and your streets become unlivable. This is known as cause and effect. For example, Baltimore's mayor, Brandon Scott, continues to try to spin the numbers rather than acknowledge the issue that residents are upset about. He cited the lowest number of homicides in 50 years, but he didn't bother to tell you that this low murder rate is not due to less attempted murders. It is due to better medical care and faster emergency response systems than the ones that used to be available 50 years ago. If you were to count all of the attempted murders, attacks with a deadly weapon, as murders, then the numbers tell a very different story, which is that violence is up, something that we all know because we have eyes. And yet the mayor claimed today Baltimore is seeing its lowest numbers of homicide in 50 years. And now this strategy in our city has become an example. for cities across the nation. But let me be clear, we're not done. One life lost is still one too many. We will continue to ignore the noise, and we will keep working. Yes, he is telling you up front that he will continue ignoring the unhappiness of the people and continue spinning the numbers in the modern version of who are you going to believe, me or your lying eyes? And I mean, I have to say, if you vote for him after he tells you that this is what he's going to do, then the problem is you. This is your fate, Blue Cities, until you are willing to try something else besides the same old failed experiment that you've been trying for decades, hoping to get different results this time. Someone once said that was the definition of insanity, and the theme of the week seems to be that the Democrat Party is indeed insane. Speaking of insanely trying the same old things over and over, hoping for different results, the Olympic figure skating gold medalist, Alyssa Liu, who just won the ESPY for Best Breakthrough Athlete, was back in the headlines this week, but sadly, not for good reasons this time. Turns out that her own younger brother is taking advantage of female athletes like her by unfairly competing against them in girls' sports in a high school in California. It turns out that Joshua Liu, who now goes by Jalen, has been illegitimately competing in basically every form of girls' sports that he can think of, from track to basketball and even ultimate frisbee, on the grounds that he sees himself as a girl, which is fine. He is, of course, free to identify in whatever way he chooses to, while still competing in the appropriate category that's based on his physical biology. A heavyweight boxer can identify as a lightweight boxer if he wants to, but he still has to compete with the other physical heavyweights while identifying as a lightweight. And likewise, you can see yourself as a girl and dress like a girl and act like a girl and choose a girl's name while competing with the other boys. This is actually not difficult or complicated, despite the people that are trying to pretend that it is. Yet this man is being willfully allowed to steal achievements and opportunities from women because this form of cheating is still catered to in California. And as a result, he recently won the women's 400-meter race at the Tri-County Athletic League Finals on May 8th. And he also won every single one of the girls' 200 and 400-meter races that he has participated in for Albany High School, taking those wins away from the girls who legitimately deserved them and stealing scholarship opportunities with the unfair advantages of his male biology. He has also played on the Albany High School girls basketball team, where as a 5'8" male junior, he has been dominating the females that he towers over. He is also described as being, quote, dominant after competing in girls' ultimate frisbee during the Ultimate High School National Invite last month in Oregon. Rather than condemning this brother of an Olympian for his blatant cheating, so-called journalists merely reported that he was, quote, extremely dominant, as, quote, one of the fastest players on the field. Yes, men are faster and stronger than women, which is why we have a separate category for women's sports in the first place. See how one thought progresses to another? That's called logic, boys and girls. Kim Jones, the co-founder of Independent Council on Women's Sports Icons, pointed out the irony to the Daily Wire that this anti-female cheater's sister, Alyssa Liu, represents the pinnacle of female athletic achievement right now, while her own brother is doing this to other female athletes. I would ask you, how many gold medals would Alyssa have won if she had had to compete against, say, the quad god, Ilya Malinin? We all know the answer to that. The only reason that she was allowed to win the gold medal that, to be clear, she deserved, is because she is not being forced to compete against male cheaters like her own brother, a privilege that her family has hypocritically decided to deny to other female athletes. A textbook case of rules for thee and not for me. As Ms. Jones correctly stated, it is a crime that girls in California are still being forced to compete against boys. Her success was possible because a category existed that recognized and celebrated female athletes on their own merits. Without a clear category for female athletes, we would not know Alyssa. And a male standard becomes the default in a backward society that devalues women for being female. A healthy society recognizes the unique merit of both male and female athletes. Now, the other truth here is that a moral person does stand up for what is right, even when it is hard, most especially when it is hard. Even when it is hard, because it means standing up to family. And based on that, the moral thing for Alyssa to do would be to stand up for other female athletes, insisting that they also have a fair playing field in women's sports. And if she doesn't, I'm sorry, but that does say something about the kind of person that she is. Having said that, the ultimate responsibility for California not giving girls a fair opportunity falls on its Democrat governor, Gavin Newsom. As Ms. Jones said, when we reach a point where we demand that our middle school girls take a public stand, or a female Olympian speak out against her own family, leadership has failed to do the easiest thing in the world. No girls should lose her place, recognition, or future because people in positions of authority refuse to protect female competition. This injustice must end. Alyssa Liu, however, seems content in the knowledge that her particular field of competition is safe, after the International Olympic Committee announced a new policy earlier this year that changed their previous ludicrous position by mandating that athletes must meet biological sex criteria in order to compete in female sports categories, and their eligibility will be determined based on a one-time SRY gene screening. Athletes who identify as trans are, of course, still welcome to compete, but they must do so in the category that places them in fair competition with other people who share the same physical advantages of their biological bodies. There's no reason why they can't do that and identify as whatever they want to at the same time. It is a false choice saying that it has to be all or nothing. It's not true. As the IOC president, Christy Coventry, said, "I understand this is a very sensitive topic. As a former athlete, I passionately believe in all Olympians to take part in fair competition. The policy that we have announced is based on science. The scientific evidence is very clear. Male chromosomes give performance advantages in sports that rely on strength, power, and endurance. It's absolutely clear that it would not be fair for biological male to compete in the female category." And we all know that that is true, and that this is the right decision, that it does not disenfranchise anyone, and that any arguments to the contrary are purely ideological. The numbers out in the public are also nowhere near close. 80% of Americans want women's sports and private spaces to be protected and for female athletes to be guaranteed a fair playing field where only biological women are allowed to compete in that category. There is no reason, despite the attempts to paint it otherwise, why a biological male who identifies as female cannot continue identifying as female while competing against the other biological males. And yet, Democrat politicians like Gavin Newsom do not have the balls to do the right thing here. And to be blunt, all because of a radical subset of the remaining 20%, because that 20% doesn't agree with him either, but a radical subset of that 20% who refuses to compromise with anyone else and thinks that their ideas are the only ones that should matter in the world, like there's still two. So to be clear, those fringe people are the ones that you are actually voting for when you vote for a Gavin Newsom, because he has proven that he will cater and defer to them on policy over everyone else combined. That is his track record. Meaning that he is just their front man. You are voting for them to be in positions of power and to make the decisions. It needs to be clear. Now, maybe you still choose to do that. Fine, that's your choice. But it needs to be clear that that is the choice you are making. Because if you don't want to make that choice, then you need to vote for someone else. It's that simple. And I'm sorry if you all can hear my stomach growling. I had to skip a couple of meals today, so unfortunately beyond my control. Hopefully the mic is not picking it up. But if it is, sorry, we live in the real world. I'm not perfect. I like to end on good news whenever I can. And there was a truly incredible medical development on the paralysis front this week when it comes to bioelectronic medicine. Scientists announced that a quadriplegic man is still showing significant, sustained improvements to his physical state several months after his computerized brain implant system was completely deactivated, indicating that these devices did far more than they were supposed to, which is already incredible in itself, but they may have also actually stimulated healing by enabling the nervous system to fundamentally restructure and repair itself through this new technology. Here's what they had to say. The new scientist reported that the miracle patient is 43-year-old Keith Thomas, who was left paralyzed from the chest down after suffering a severe car accident in 2020. Like all quadriplegics, with no sensation or control over any of his limbs, Mr. Thomas faced a life that would be lived in total dependence on others. But when he participated in a groundbreaking clinical trial in 2023 at the Feinstein Institute for Medical Research, his entire future was put on an entirely new trajectory. He underwent a 15-hour experimental surgery where medical pioneers performed a double neural bypass, placing 5 microelectrodes into the motor and the sensory regions of Mr. Thomas's brain. This cutting-edge system uses AI to decode Mr. Thomas's brain signals for movement. And then it relays those signals to electronic forearm splints, which trigger muscle contractions, allowing him to move his arms. In the opposite direction, 3D printed devices for his hands have sensors in them that gather feedback, which is sent back electronically, delivering the information to his brain and creating the feedback of sensory touch. This incredible advancement allowed Mr. Thomas to move independently again, making daily miracles out of the movements that we all take for granted every day, such as being able to drink from a cup by himself, being able to scratch his face when it itches, and even being able to hold fragile objects, all of which he was able to do because of this sci-fi level advancement. But to top it all off, the story would have been incredible right there. But to top it all off, the part that was a completely unexpected breakthrough occurred by accident. As part of an attempt to evaluate the long-term impacts of this still experimental treatment, which they must do, Mr. Thomas's system was turned off for 4 weeks. And then, unfortunately, there was a fire in the building which turned this 4-week hiatus into a 3-month-long blackout. But to the astonishment of the scientists involved, Mr. Thomas's condition did not regress as you would expect it to do. His body retained the newfound ability to move, and it retained its touch sensation, even after being entirely disconnected from the computer that has been implanted in his brain. In fact, Mr. Thomas's condition is continuing to heal and improve on its own now. He can move his individual fingers with increased precision and is reporting feeling a distinct tingling sensation in his wrist when physical pressure is applied there. The scientists believe that his continued recovery is a direct result of the brain's neuroplasticity, meaning its capacity to create entirely new pathways to circumvent the damaged areas. By reinforcing and strengthening the neural networks that survived the damage, this incredible technology appears to have done much more than it was intended to do. It has apparently triggered a permanent remodeling of Mr. Thomas's nervous system. It has stimulated the new pathways, and apparently the brain has decided to keep using them even without the device. While the scientific community is obviously celebrating this incredible milestone as the massive leap forward that it is for the new field of neuroprosthetics, scientists are also cautioning people not to get too carried away yet, because these results have not been duplicated in other patients at this point, and one patient by himself is not scientifically representative of everyone. Due to the fact that spinal cord injuries vary drastically from individual to individual, the clinical trials will need to be expanded to a much larger pool of patients to prove whether this neural rewiring can be duplicated in anyone else. But in the meantime, the results for Mr. Thomas have changed his life He had this to say: "I can now scratch my face, wipe my eyes independently. The technology has given me back both connection and sense of self. I am so happy for you, man. And for everyone else, the completely unexpected recovery that Mr. Thomas has made has opened up an incredibly bright horizon of possibilities for millions of others who are currently living with the life-changing condition of severe paralysis. People, we live in some unbelievably amazing and miraculous times. Take a moment for gratitude and awe that out of all of humanity, you are privileged to witness these times." Thank you for listening to this week's episode. I hope that you enjoyed it. If you did, I would ask you to please help me build this podcast into a success by clicking the like and follow buttons, because that is what does the trick in making these things successful, and it doesn't cost anything to do. And I hope most of all that you come back again next week. Until then, have a good week, my friends.